Welcome, everybody, aboard the Tabletop Express. This is Creators Corner, where we go behind the curtain to talk with creators, artists, and designers to find out a little bit more about them, how they got their start in the industry, and what they're up to. I'm really excited today to have Jamey Stegmaier join the show. Jamey, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, look, I'm excited to kind of kick this off. And as I like to do, as I talk to anyone who plays games, is I like to ask where it began. What started it for you? What are the games that kind of got you into this hobby in the first place?
Well, I kind of have two, I guess, quick stories there. One is when I was young, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, around that age. I started playing fairly, I think, looking back, fairly decent games like Scotland Yard. I played Key to the Kingdom, played a little Magic, a little chess, Millborn, just a pretty good variety of games. I'm lucky that my parents exposed me to a variety of games like that. And then as an adult, I returned to the hobby. I mean, I played games pretty much my entire life, but played a little, mostly poker for like a few years after college. And then I got into Catan and then Agricola and then Stone Age and Fresco. And then I went deeper and deeper into the hobby from there. So yeah, starting young and then came back as an adult to these modern board games that are so awesome now.
That is a fantastic start to it. I mean, I always go back and I think about, really for me, it did begin with Monopoly. And as much as people have comments about Monopoly in the board gaming side, I know in the community, but it was the starter for a lot of people.
Sure.
As a creator, though, you've actually written a lot about this. You've actively done and ran Kickstarters. And Kickstarter has obviously played a really important part of your own success. I mean, I'm going to highlight too, on your site, you have a whole section about these lessons you've learned from Kickstarting. Where do you see right now in the gaming industry Kickstarter as important for designers? Because I've seen a lot of varied opinions on this. Who is Kickstarter for, and what's the most important thing people can really take from Kickstarter these days? Because obviously everyone's backing something these days, it feels like.
Yeah. That's a great question. Who is Kickstarter for right now in 2021? I think there are possibly a few different answers there. I think one is that I think Kickstarter is still for that new creator who has something that they've worked really hard on, not just an idea, but something they've worked really hard on, and they want to see if a lot of other people want that same thing that they're passionate about. I think the catch there for those new creators in particular, especially when you don't have much money to work with, when you're still kind of building that audience, building that budget, is being able to present something that's polished enough that people trust you. Basically, they trust that you're going to deliver something awesome. And I think that's pretty tough nowadays. So I think Kickstarter is still for those creators, but I think it's more difficult for them now. Whereas it's maybe a little bit easier for the established creators who have a community. They have a bit more of a budget that they can spend up front on the art and graphic design, and for them to gauge demand for their games, their projects, to make it better, to build a bigger community around them. So I see kind of both sides of it. Where do you see it right now?
For me, it is a mix. And there's some who do a very good job. In particular, I back a lot of the games from an upcoming guest that I'll get to. But they do a lot with Kickstarter in the sense of getting the feedback from the community. So to me, the feedback is a huge piece of it. You take a lot of feedback, I know, from your community. You've got essentially a loyalty program. How important is that feedback side for you, not just with Kickstarter, but just as you go through the process of designing a game? The feedback has to shape in some way kind of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, and I'm still learning about this as I go. We have a great program called the Stonemaier Ambassador Program. So we have two programs that sound kind of similar. One is the Ambassador Program. One is the Champion Program. Champion is something different. Ambassadors are pretty much volunteers. They sign up because they're passionate about what we do at Stonemaier Games, and they do different things. Some of them are proofreaders, some of them are playtesters, and that's I'll focus on them for this question because I do get a lot of feedback from those playtesters where I send out the files for a game that I'm working on to a small group of playtesters within those ambassadors, and they send back their reports, their data, their thoughts, and their opinions about how the game is shaping up to be at that point in time. So I learn a lot from what they share.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember being a part of a playtest for Exploding Kittens, which I know falls in few categories for people. I've seen some love-hate direction at that party game category, but it was a fascinating process. The playtesting, really important. How important for you does the playtesting go in terms of just the process? Because Is it a few people? Is it 100 people? How many playtesters do you really need to get a true sense of what the game needs? Because your games also, I would say, have a variety of levels of difficulty. They certainly vary along your collection of games that you've designed and put out there.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. I mean, the games vary. The types of playtesters vary. So I try to get a kind of a diverse array of playtesters from around the world. Men, women, different ages, families, people that play with their friends, people that play with one other person versus larger groups. Years ago, I focused a little bit more on quantity of playtesters. And I think there is a critical mass that is really helpful. So usually for any given game, I send out typically around 3 to 5 waves of blind playtesting. And each wave involves usually 5 or 6 groups of people with varying numbers of people. So over the course of a playtest, usually around between 100 and 200 people actually get to play the game and offer their thoughts on it. But the key that I discovered beyond just quantity is the quality of that feedback. Like, how good are these playtesters at sharing examples of what happened, like why things happened, instead of just jumping to kind of a solution. Sometimes I think that can be our instinct as a gamer. We play something, we're like, oh, this doesn't work. Here's a solution for it. I'm less interested in the solutions because I can do my best as the designer or developer to figure them out. I'm more interested in the why. I'm interested in what happened when you played, what was frustrating, and why was it frustrating. And so getting that down, and also then analyzing the data that we get from playtesters in a really deep way. And I found that I've started to bring in a professional data analyst to do that, especially for our asymmetrical games, so that we get a great data analysis, which again is more about quality versus quantity.
Now, what about the game? What about that process of creating? You know, I've read a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of designers, not live on something like this. This is a newer thing for me, but they've talked about their processes of some have a notebook. I've seen others just kind of come up with an idea and say, I'm going to run with this for a few months. So what is your process in terms of getting the ideas? Because I can only imagine there's a lot of ideas going around the head, especially because you play a lot of other games.
Yeah, I do play. I get a lot of ideas from other games. Whether or not I do play a lot of games, I get ideas from that. I also consume a lot of content that people create about games, whether reviews, discussions, things like that. So I can constantly learn from what other people think about games. So I have a few different methods. I have kind of a notebook I would hold it up, but I'd probably spoil something if I do, because I have some on my desk right here. But so I have a bunch of notebooks where I keep just pencil and paper notes. Usually I do a lot of brainstorming with pencil and paper. I also use a Trello, which is a web app, a list making app, where I have a long list of mechanisms that I'm curious about, and a long list of themes and kind of general ideas that I want to work on someday, or maybe not work on. They're just things that I play a game. I'm like, oh, this is a cool thing. Here's a little tweak on it that I might try someday, and I throw it on that list. And every once in a while, I revisit that list to see if it applies to the game I'm working on.
Well, speaking of that design process, I think one of the pieces of that design process is you design a game, you get it out, fulfillment, all that sort. And again, I'd go back to that link I shared earlier if people want to see about the Kickstarter side of that. Yeah. But after you fulfill, eventually you've got a game. When is the time that you decide it's going to have an expansion? Is that part of the early process that you're planning out? Okay, maybe we'll have a few expansions of this. Here's some of the ideas. Or does the expansion piece come in maybe at a later date when you realize, okay, here's some fun things we can do with this?
For me, my design method is generally, I take all the ideas that I think really work, and not just that I think work, but that play test well, that people actually have fun with, that are as balanced as they can be, as intuitive as they can be. And I try to put all of that content into the core game. So perhaps some designers kind of set aside some of that content for the future. Usually it's just a few more cars or a few more civilizations, things like that. So if they're ready for the first game to be for the original game, I put them in that game. And so I don't really leave anything for expansions. And so it is usually months or sometimes even years later that I return to a game and think, oh, okay, this would be interesting to add to it, or this would be interesting to expand to it. And sometimes those ideas come from other people, like the Wind Gambit and The Rise of Fenris, two of the expansions for Scythe, came from fans who posted ideas in the Scythe Facebook group on Board Game Geek, and I was like, oh wow, that's actually pretty cool. And I ended up working together to develop and design those expansions.
And then what about things like, for example, My Little Scythe, where you take it into a different generation almost? I mean, I could tell you, my son can't play Scythe yet. He can play a lot of advanced game. He does play a lot of like he plays Raiders of the North Sea and a few other games with me. So he's been playing games a long time. He may be an exception to the rule. I'm not sure. But My Little Scythe definitely targeted a different audience, but uses so many of those mechanics from the original Scythe. So I found that fascinating. How did that actually come about?
That was the creation of another fan, a fan of Scythe named Hobie Chow up in Vancouver. He wanted kind of similar to what you just said there. He wanted to play Scythe, kind of Scythe, with his daughter, who I believe was around 5 years old at the time. But she wasn't quite ready for Scythe, even though she was already a gamer at that age. And so he and her worked together to create just a fun prototype for My Little Scythe, which was at the time My Little Pony themed. And he had a lot of fun with it. She had a lot of fun with it. And so he ended up sharing it on the Scythe Facebook group and some other places online. And it kind of went viral within the game community for a little while, a couple of years ago, where it got my attention. I was like, oh, well, people are actually seeming to really enjoy this prototype that he put out there. And so I requested the files from him to give it a try and tested it out, and found that it did mimic those things from Scythe that I really enjoy, but it distilled them down to, kind of an 8-page rule book. It's just, it's a much simpler game, but it's still very satisfying. And so I figured, we'll give this a try. We'll publish it and see how it goes.
I do love too with that. You end up putting in some of the expansion-like pieces from the original game. A lot of great fun. I have to talk about that game a little bit. That is one of my favorites. I have here with me the rule book, the hardcover bound.
Cool.
And that brings me to a thought that I had is, how do you know also that it's a time that, okay, this is good. We don't need more content for this, because that's almost an end of a cycle, especially when you put out a rule book. It feels like the end of a cycle at that point. And there is a lot of content, obviously, for this particular game. But, when it comes down to it, that decision, that's got to be obviously a pretty clear one for you.
Yeah. I've tried to be careful over the years about using the word complete. So on that rule book, it says the Scythe complete rule book. I've used that word perhaps incorrectly and a little too early for another game. I used it for Viticulture way back in like 2014. For Scythe, though, basically we set out to tell a story in the expansions, and it ended up being a trilogy of expansions. And when we finished the Rise of Fenris, there were a few more little products that we produced. We produced the modular board after that, and I think the legendary box came after the Rise of Fenris. But really the story that Jakob and I were looking to tell through that game, Jakob is the artist and world builder, was at that point complete. And we were like, there are so many examples in media, like movies and TV shows, where it just goes on like one season too long, or one book too long, or one movie too long. Let's end on what we think is a high note here. We've told this story. We're happy with what we've shared here. And perhaps someday we'll explore the world of Scythe in a different way, in a different game. But we just wanted to wrap it up at the right time, basically. And so it truly is complete. Like those are all the things that will ever be inside the tabletop game.
Well, I only have a few more questions for you, because I know we only have so much more time with you, but I have to ask you, a big piece of every one of your games is the art. How do you go about the process of finding the right artist? I mean, I go to a game that Stonemaier put out, which for example is Wingspan. And I mean, obviously the work from Elizabeth in that is incredible. It's beautiful. How do you decide on the art, and how integral is the art to you in a game right now?
Oh, the art, there is a huge part of it, of any game that I design. Even if I'm working, I design or develop, the art it's almost everything. I mean, the game design is so important, obviously, and the world building, but the art is what draws me into games. It wants me that immerses me in the game and into that world. Every game of ours has a different story. Like with Wingspan, my co-founder Alan, his kids went to school with this woman Natalia, who happened to be a nature artist, a self-taught nature artist. And when we were working on, we happened to be working on Wingspan at the time, and he was like, Jamey, check out this artist, see what you think of her work. And I was like, this is perfect. Like, this is the perfect type of art. So part of it is just like seeing the art at the right time and having it fit or not. sometimes it doesn't fit. I mean, sometimes they're very like Natalia's style could have been completely different, like maybe a more comical style. And I could have looked at it and thought, this is beautiful art, but it just isn't a fit for Wingspan. But it just happened to align at the right time.
Yeah, I want to just call out to this great comment from Ryan about the art and then the fact that art selling a game alone. When I speak to art selling a game alone, Parks stands out to me. Yeah. I bought Parks because of the art. I did not look at the gameplay. I don't do that often. That's a rarity. Look, obviously working with people is really important. How do you go about building those relationships in the industry and with your fans and with those? Is it social? Is it through the community? Is it across the board? And is that part of your strategy ultimately in the long run to stay informed and create the best games possible?
I mean, there are lots of like kind of micro answers to that, how I interact on different platforms, which platforms we use. But the overarching principle or philosophy that I use is I want to elevate people, and I want to share things that I love. Like anyone, I have a lot of opinions about things. I have things I don't like. Obviously, everyone has things I don't like. Yes. But when I use my time on social media, my community building time, I want to focus on things I love. And so whenever on my YouTube channel, I focus on my favorite mechanism on games that I play. On Instagram, I post things that I love and that I'm excited about. And I try to do the same thing when I find someone to talk to online about any type of game, whether it's our game or other games. I try to keep it positive. And so that's kind of my overarching philosophy.
Well, I got one last really important question for you.
Yeah.
One of the big reasons that I started this channel, and albeit how small as it may be, and if you are watching this, I'm just going to encourage you to like and subscribe. We've got a lot more content coming along with some people you may have never seen before and some that you have seen, talking about games, talking about why we think you might like this game and who you might be, and more of this Creator's Corner. But as part of that, Jamey, one of the big reasons they create was because of education. For those who may want to create a game, what message do you give them about getting going and getting started with that process? Because I know a lot of people, my son included, has a game he started designing with these little dinosaurs fighting each other. It's a simple design. We started making things in Canva. And my thought process has always been just start. But what do you say to those people who want to do something and really create a game and eventually get out there in that industry?
Well, there are a couple. I'll give two little answers here. One is, and kind of the easy one is, play a lot of games. That's kind of the fun way to do it. And like, if you want to design a game, don't just take the knowledge of the games you've already played, but play and learn and expand your knowledge of games. The harder part is something that you just touched on, which is actually to start making it. Like there's really nothing holding anyone back from making that first prototype. Even if it's terrible, and it probably will be terrible. Even my prototypes, after working on this for many, many years, all of my first prototypes are terrible. But the philosophy I try to share is that a terrible prototype is worth 100 times more than an idea that you never actually get to the table. Ideas are great, ideas are wonderful, but it's so much more valuable to actually start working on it, like you said. And so that I would encourage people to do that. If you have an idea for a game and you want to start somewhere, start with a terrible prototype and see how it goes from there.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm definitely going to encourage everyone to go, please check out Jamey's website, check out his games. There's a lot of variety there. And one thing that you did note, Jamey, that we didn't talk about, but you create a lot of content around games, your favorite, mechanisms in the game and how games play. And I think it's fantastic. And it's a big reason why I wanted to have you on. So I do want to thank you for that. Before everyone goes, I do want to let you know the next episode of Creators Corner, specifically February 7th at 4 p.m. I'm really excited that Shem Phillips is going to be joining me to chat a little bit about his process. I'm a big fan of Shem as well. And Shem has some of my favorite games, which you can't see them because they're behind my head, but Raiders of the North Sea and a variety of other games. So some fun games of riding levels that I think you'll be very interested in if you haven't played them. And he's a great guy. So want to say tune in then. And again, thank you, Jamey, for joining me today. And I'm just going to say to everyone who is watching, please go ahead, like, subscribe. You can search Tabletop Express on YouTube. New channel, so got to get to 100 to brand it. So search for it. You're going to find it. I promise. I'm going to get there. And I promise you I'll give you some more good content that makes it worthwhile. So with that said, thank you for coming aboard the Tabletop Express. And we'll see you on the next Creators Corner.